Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. And our guest today is Larissa Licha, and welcome to the show, Larissa. How are you?
Doing good. Excited to be here today and chat with you.
Thank you for jumping on with Leveraging Leadership audience. I know you're a former chief of staff who has now founded a company called Joyn, which helps chiefs of staff and other busy business professionals, but give us the backdrop on you.
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of like an untraditional path into technology, but I've now been in tech for, I think, 14, 15 years. But I'm actually a former tattoo artist and kind of by chance after a big life event ended up in tech, literally by reading a book and moved out to Ireland with my first job being customer support for Google Ads. So it's literally the person being shouted at all day by people because Google Ads wasn't working the way it should. But within 6 months at that company, I became an operations manager. And it's, I think, where my operations path just kind of like took shape and then transitioned to my most recent company. I was there for actually 8 years. So I've seen it like from startup to getting ready to IPO. As a sales rep, moved into account management, was on like competitive intelligence, and then moved into product management, where my customer centricity was like translating how do we actually generate value with products. Started running a business unit and product strategy. And then finally, because I usually was the person deployed to wherever things are the most broken, put Larissa on it. I was made the chief of staff for product design and engineering. And my job really was being the bridge between our R&D and business teams. And I had two principals during that time with very different experiences. And I always say I feel the chief of staff role probably prepared me better than any role to now be a CEO, not only because it kind of inspired what we're doing today, but also just from like the pace and keeping track of so many things and constant prioritization. I think it's been the best role to kind of like gear me up for what we're doing now. So yeah, that's my very long random story and hopefully a short time frame.
Yeah, that was great. First of all, it seems like you are into tattoos. You have some yourself. Were you into that before you became an artist, or how did that work?
It was kind of in conjunction. I actually just used to go to the tattoo parlor to pen and draw after work. Eventually, you're like, do you just want to like do that on someone? And I was like, okay. So I started getting actually my first tattoos when I was 16. And I get most of my tattoos from 16 to 20. And then just recently started getting my other arm done. So it was kind of in conjunction and had a really long break. And now I guess I'm back at it.
And you have a full sleeve, it looks like, coming in.
Yeah.
What book did you read that got you into technology?
It's actually really ironic because it had nothing to do with tech, but backstory is I was really sick. I nearly died. I got into my second relationship like 9 months after, which was a US soldier stationed in Germany. So I stayed in Germany. But after I got sick, I had a really hard time drawing out of my head. So I actually wasn't really able to tattoo anymore because I had this creative block that actually I just got rid of like 5 years ago because of my co-founder's grandma. Which is really funny, but she forced me to get rid of my creative block, which was interesting. But after that relationship ended after like 2.5, 3 years, I read this book and it was about this woman. She was like stuck in a rut. And I just was like, I have to change this. And like life came to her in physical form, like completely like disheveled and stuff. And I kind of was like, huh, interesting. I'm kind of stuck in a rut. And it played in Dublin. So I was like, I think I could move to Ireland because I'm European. I can live anywhere. So I randomly started applying to jobs in Ireland and then just got this job. And I lived in this hostel with these like 3 Indian dudes for a while because I had no place to live. But I had this job. But the book is actually written by Cecilia Ahern, and her dad is a politician that's really hated in Ireland. So it's actually ironic that a book that a lot of Irish people don't like Cecilia because of her dad brought me to Ireland. And I actually stayed there for 3 years. So Irish always found that story pretty funny and kind of ironic. And I was like, yeah, fascinating. But
Wow.
very good 3 years. So
Wow, that's an amazing, amazing journey. So then you became chief of staff and you had two main executives you worked with, and I believe it was CTO and CPO, if I have that right. And as you described it, they had very different personalities and work styles and different things you had to adapt to. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my first principal was the chief product officer, and like how my role kind of came to be again, it hit my like 7 years or so at the firm, 6.5. And I kind of was like plateauing of that. I just don't know what to do here anymore. I want to be more strategic and be more involved in the overall company strategy. So the CPO brought to me the role of the chief of staff. And I was like, I don't really know what that is. I was like, because I only knew the context of like political and like we didn't really have chiefs of staff at that point. So I really didn't know what to expect. But he basically made me write my own job description.
Yeah.
But the experience with him was more so that he was very strategic, but he was really bad at accountability. And obviously, as a chief of staff, you have all this like dotted line influence. So you can come up with the best plans, but then if there's no accountability for people to actually adopt or do something, it's very frustrating. So that was kind of, again, he's a wonderful leader, but like he was this person where if they didn't instantly take to something, he just was like, oh, well, it didn't work. And I was like, we spent 6 months on this. Like, what are you talking about? We did all this pre work, but there was still this thing where it just needed to have more top down direct, influence on people to actually like adopt something. So, but he ultimately moved into becoming like a BU president, and I was then moved to the CTO. And he was perceived very differently. He is like a very intimidating, like short tempered person. But I've known him at that point for 8 years. He was one of my first mentors at the firm. And when you know him, he's actually very warm and like really kind. But his like, I think people that don't know him perspective is like, oh crap. Like whenever he's in a room, we got to listen. So with him, it was more that whatever he said, people immediately jumped on it. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's hold on. We're not saying to reprioritize everything. So I was more the buffer between him and the teams, but there was a lot of accountability. So whenever we made a decision in partnership with the stakeholders to do something, he was really good at making sure it's actually like, yes, whatever Larissa says, she's my stand-in. We're doing this, right? But I think I had to work more on that. Team still didn't see me as an extension of him and saw me as a partner to them, because it wasn't just about executing what he wanted. It was also about making sure I'm bringing things to him, right? Because he's so high up, he has barely like any idea of all the things happening in the gritty. So I had to still get that trust with people to not see me as an extension of him that just operates in his interests, and make it really clear that I'm operating in both of their interests. And it's my job to bring everyone together. And with that, help the company as a whole. So that was like kind of the difference between like those two, which was very interesting.
I think that last call out's really important. You're not just an extension of your principal. Certainly you have a special connection there, but you're also partnering with the leadership team and middle management and all the different people across the organization. And you have their back and their best interests at heart too. And so it's very much a two-way or like an all-way street where conversations are going back and forth. And I think you and I were talking before, and you said, look, the big, scary, person with a stern persona. I didn't care if he got mad at me. He could get mad at me all he wanted. I didn't care. Sometimes it was the right thing to challenge him and to provide a different perspective. So you are, in a sense, able to level with him in certain scenarios where it was called for.
Yeah. And I think I kind of notoriously was known for that at the company, even beyond my principal. And obviously had a lot to do with I've been there for 8 years. At this point, I've worked with most of the executives for a really long time. I had a really good foundation with like everyone, but I think I was notoriously like the person that challenged executives, still in a way that it was like, I understood them, I understood their goals, I understood where it was coming from. It's like informed. It was like an emotional challenge, but at the same time, people knew if I set my mind to something, it's really hard to like get me off it, and I'll fight for it over and over and over and over again, because it is an informed decision, not like a, emotional reaction. So I think that was a good thing. But we had a lot of like leadership changes, especially at the time period I became the chief of staff. So we had a lot of new people come in, especially like VP and above. And it was actually interesting for me because I had to build relationships with these people and gain trust. And we were now all remote. So there was no like ability to like be in person. So it was much more slow to like build that relationship, understand them and gain their trust. So I think that's interesting going from I know everyone and everyone trusts me to like, oh snap, I have to like establish myself with these people and gain their trust because they're new, right? And then also help facilitate trust, not just between me and them, but between them and other executives, right? I think that became such a big part of my job and like being the bridge between product and like sales and marketing and like make sure they're actually seeing eye to eye and kind of meet each other halfway, which I think became such a huge chunk of my job. And it was really interesting to kind of like be in that position and see that company through that transition and the challenges with it. So yeah.
Do you happen to have an example or remember just one example of how you helped introduce an executive to the rest of the organization or how you built trust with incoming hire? Because I've worked with several chiefs of staff who have been in that same position, and there's different reactions to that scenario. So, for instance, you were there for 8 years. That's quite a long time. So things grew up around you. You had a lot of institutional knowledge. You were a known quantity, and sometimes people get threatened by new people coming in at a high level. And oh, okay, well now I have to almost prove myself to that person. And another reaction would be, okay, now I have new team members and I got to get them up to speed as fast as possible to make sure that they're in the right spot. So I'm just curious, do you have an example of a time you did that?
Yeah, honestly, for us, and this has kind of been like a running joke internally, it always felt like our product organization was cursed. Like we had a really hard time with product leadership. And like we changed product leadership a lot. And we hired someone that had like a lot of SaaS background, which was like really relevant because we're making this transition to SaaS. So we needed a product lead that just had more experience. But I was dealing with a lot of like just the like baseline bias against product leadership, right? Because like the perception just after seeing it fail over and over again, both on the product team, but also like every other team was skepticism, right? Like it's not going to work out. Like, why even bother? Whatever. And everyone was kind of wanted to stay in their own silos and kind of maintain sort of things that kind of belief system that we've built up over the years. And I think for me, I think one of the biggest skills not of me, but other chiefs of staff is kind of to be as impartial third party, right? And even though I've been there for 8 years, I had to keep my biases in check because yes, I've seen product leadership fail over and over and over again and see the relationship between product and other organizations break as a result. And it's so hard to come back from once that's like so systemic in your culture. But my job really was giving this person like a fair shot, right? Like at this. And like that for me, my job was deeply understanding them, how I can set them up for success, how they've like worked prior, what they've seen work, and also like give them the context they need to succeed, right? Because like I had to be really transparent with them and like, hey, here's like the things I think you'll like come across that will be more challenging for your role. And here's why. Like here's the organizational context, but here's like what we've seen work. And I think it was more about like how can you lean on the people that already have trust in the organization and be seen as someone that like empowers them effectively in the organization versus like being like, I'm here now, we're doing this, because that never worked. It was always this people just didn't understand or didn't try to understand that there's a way of working, that there's learnings. We've tried things, they failed, certain things worked. And it was really about like bringing people on this journey. And like sometimes we retried things for sure, like even with him. But I think it was all about how can he get the right people on the journey with him and like hear them out and then make that part of his narrative. So basically using them to build trust with the rest of the organization. It was still really hard, but it was more because of he operated very at the executive level. Like he had less expertise working like with people in the day to day, and that was like kind of then my job, right? Trying to help him get that understanding and get that gist because he was really gatekeeping his time to spend with executives. And I was like, you have to like talk to the people on the ground to actually understand what is going on. Um, so that was kind of like my job to be the bridge, but it took a little longer than I would have liked just because it wasn't his way of working. And he kind of had to change his own approach to how he's entering the organization to kind of overcome some of these things. But Yeah, it was definitely not an easy one. It's just unwinding like belief systems and ways of working is a pretty tough one. But it helps when you have history and context and understand the individual players that can help you shift certain things, whether it's perception or whatever.
And it sounds like you helped him build bridges and you put special emphasis on, hey, he was geared toward the executives. You said, hey, we have to pay attention to your peers and your directs and the people who might be your internal customers and consuming your product, so to speak. I think that's hugely important too. And I really resonated with what you said about if there's been bad blood in the water for certain roles or a revolving door with certain roles, which I've had experience with. This, good intention executive comes in there like, all right, I'm new. I'm going to, shake things up and I'm going to try these things. And we're like, we've done that 3 times already. Can we please don't make us do that again? So giving that person context to backfill like, hey, here's the scene you're going into. Like, I want to set you up well. Understand that people are already burnt out from this part of it. So that's a good job on a chief of staff side. So if you were to give a piece of advice to a chief of staff, what would it be? And then a second question, now that you're a founder and CEO, what piece of advice would you give to founders or CEOs thinking about a chief of staff? And then we can talk about Joyn.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest thing is if you're becoming a chief of staff internally or joining your company, there needs to be a lot of clarity on like how they think about the chief of staff. Because I think it can be very vague, especially internally. So it's really important to have your person, your principal, be really clear on here's what this person does, right? And like here's how you'll work with them. Because I think that being vague is like really tough for the chief of staff. Because then like people kind of leverage you or they don't leverage you, and like they listen to you or they don't listen to you, and it's kind of on you to establish that. So having clarity on what's the role, how does this role interact, etc. And that was such a stark difference between the first principal that I had, where he just over relied on the fact that I've been there for a long time and people trusted me, versus second was like, no, Larissa is like an extension of me, right? And like, here's how things go. And he was just very clear and had like a lot of like follow through. And I will say, because to the chief of staff role success, it's all relationships, right? You can have the best processes or upskilled, but in the end, it comes down to whether or not, you understand people, their goals, their motivations, and you can build trust with them. So having somebody that helps you set the stage right as you come in and you have the clarity as well for yourself, I think is really important as a foundation. And I think the same goes with the CEOs. I think I see so many CEOs seeing the chief of staff as the person that does the things they don't want to do. But chiefs of staff are actually very strategic. And again, if you like apply them that way, they can be such a force multiplier that doesn't only like free up your time, sure, whatever, but it's actually more about like the organizational impact. And I think it goes back to like understand what it is you want out of the chief of staff. And ideally do your research and talk to people that had chiefs of staff before you hire your first one. And like understand what worked for them and didn't work for them. And then figure out what is it you need. Do you need a chief of staff? Do you need an EA? Right? Like there's like different roles that fulfill different things.
Okay.
But I wouldn't say that, the chief of staff will like be the silver bullet for all of your problems that you don't want to deal with. They're really there to like give you perspective, help you navigate, yes, get people on board. But in the end, there's still responsibility on you, right? Like that doesn't go away. And I think again, it goes back to the first principle is kind of just like, Marissa got this. She always got this. But in the end, I'd still sit in a dotted line influence, right? So like, unless he's really clear, like I said, and like really clear of expectations, ownership, accountability, and it's really kind of like the tailwind behind me, right?
Right.
Like nothing is going to happen. And I think that's like a really important thing. And it's just chiefs of staff need clarity and they need to be set up for success. And then they can be a force multiplier. But there's so many things I think people are still doing wrong. And I know the role is like, getting more and more established, but I think just keeping that in check as you're bringing on a chief of staff is important.
I agree 100%. So thank you for that. Tell us about Joyn. Why did you found this company? What problem does it solve? How does it interact with chiefs of staff?
Yeah, I mean, it was really motivated by the chief of staff role because, like I said, I was kind of like the bridge between all these different teams, but I was just like, it was like crazy how I spent my time, right? I was like in so many status meetings. I had like 30 one-on-ones every week. I was like lurking in 100 Slack channels to kind of get a gist of what was going on, right? And like that to me was like wild in terms of how much overhead it is. And it wasn't just for me because like you had, I don't know, all these other people like being impacted by the status meetings and the Slack messages. So for me, I was like, there's so many things, and I use this like prioritization matrix to basically show my principle, like how I'm spending my time. I was like, so much of my time is just like homework and admin stuff. I'm spending very little time on strategic things because to keep the train on the tracks, I need to do all these like very manual things and dig into all these information to get a like picture on what's going on. So I was like, this is honestly just stupid. Like, this is not how a role like chief of staff should spend their time. And it's not how a PM or engineer, et cetera, spend their time, right? So the motivation behind Joyn really was, how can we take away this like overhead of context gathering to make really informed decisions on what you need to prioritize, where you need to lean in? And also, we had one chief of staff who talked to, and she was like, I always feel like I'm this bee buzzing around people's head because I'm like, what's the status in this? Have you talked to I? And she was like, with Joyn, right, that it kind of gives me the context I need. My relationships will change because I'll go into a meeting and be like, hey, I know you're blocked in this. Here's what we can do versus constantly slacking. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And then too late finding out something is blocked and being really reactive. So we really just wanted to build a platform that gives this real-time context to remove the overhead so people can make really informed decisions very rapidly. And with that, like start getting rid of like repetitive meetings and the unnecessary one-on-ones and like lurking in Slack, right? And just give people a ton of time back. So that's like really the motivation behind what we're doing today.
And I have a chief of staff, and one of the first things she said to me was, Emily, I have 600 Slack channels. Is that too many? And I said, yes, that's too many. She said, should I cull some of these out? Yes, that would be a great idea because that's just way too many, even if you're a large organization. So Joyn, Joyn, is, you would describe it better, but like a data layer that sits on top, below, or in all of these different systems and tools that you have. And so it's not replacing them per se, but it's giving you meaningful data where you don't have to hunt and peck for different little data points here and there. Is that a way to say it or start it?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we started out, I think we talked to 70 chiefs of staff or something over the course of like 6 weeks. It was pretty crazy. But the biggest thing for them was, I really don't want to use another tool on top of all these tools, right? Whatever I tried, Asana, Notion, etc., I still find myself just going into Jira, just going into the spreadsheet, and then just stitching my own thing together. And like nothing really helped them solve this like context gathering. So yeah, we're like a horizontal layer on top of like, Slack, Notion, Confluence, etc., to basically make sense of all the work that's happening to gather the context. And then we basically push it into where people are already doing their work. So pushing things into Slack or pushing things into Notion. So as much as possible, we're just doing all the stuff that helps you do your job for you completely in the background without adopting a tool. And this also came from my company tried to move everyone onto Asana. And that was like a 9-month project of hell for me. And in the end, it failed. And I just went back to my spreadsheet, right? Then I was like, but I had as a result to lurk in Jira and Notion and like be in all these different places to have my spreadsheet. And yet there was always context missing because we only scale so far, right? And it's kind of the most frustrating thing I think that we've heard a lot is like, no matter how much people do, there's still always surprises and there's still always these things we react to way too late. Because, either people don't tell you, when you have like, I don't know, Asana and you have like a status tracker, it's like green, 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 green. And in a week before release, it's like, never mind, we're too late. And you're like, what? Like we ran status meetings, I checked in reviews, everything was fine. There's no real representation of how things are actually going at scale. So we really wanted to track that, do that, give you what you need. But again, without having to adopt like a whole other tool on top of all this stuff you already had to like
and migrate things over from another tool.
Yeah, no.
So if you're a chief of staff and you sign up for Joyn, is the process, okay, I'm gonna, set up my account, integrate all of the different platforms, tell it where I wanted to spit out my outputs, Slack, for instance. And then like, how does it work? It just collects data saying, okay, if you're wanting to know the status of this project, I'm going to collect any notes and data points from all these different systems and tools you integrated and feed that to you in a clean status report. Is that a use case?
Yeah. So, for example, like initially, yes, you integrate stuff with takes like 5 minutes. And then initially, people would basically tell us what are the things you care about. So it could be like product releases, OKRs, and they would just give us like a descriptor. And that was basically like the context package we use to then look across Slack and Jira and all these systems to in our data system pull in anything relevant that we need to like contextualize to people. Now we actually do this completely automatically. So you don't need to give us anything. You only integrate. And we're looking across all the things to basically understand trending topics. So we see where's movement, what are people talking about, what are the meetings that are happening. So you actually understand here's where people are spending their time. Because, you might think everyone is spending their time on the number one priority, but they might. And I think that's what it's really hard to actually know this. So now you really just integrate. You don't really have to do anything else. You can obviously define it. And then we're basically now you can get daily insights into the top priorities, and how we're deciding it is we understand questions you're asking, things you're looking at, like the documents you're reading. And that gives us like a general sense of, oh, these are things important to you because you have conversations about it or in meetings about it. Or you've looked at this Notion page over and over and over again to know what's going on. And you can also tell us what you want to like hear about, obviously. And then we give you like a daily digest of it. We're basically doing also weekly summaries, which is off what chiefs of staff manually put together. They're writing these like weekly updates on the key priorities that they're sending to the executives. That we're doing completely automatically, and you can get it into Slack or your inbox. And then we're doing like personalized pushes, which is more like anything you need to urgently be aware of, depending on, what your priorities are. We immediately let you know in the moment. Cause like, we don't want you to be surprised a week later that X, Y, and Z got deprioritized because the whole engineering team is firefighting a bug. So no, this feature is not getting released next week. And you should probably know this.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is this one of the things where, as chief of staff, you think you have tabs on everything, but then there's this whole other email thread or other Slack discussion going on about related topic, and you kind of get blindsided like, okay, that would have been nice to know because it would have saved me and this team a huge amount of work, or we could have prioritized this to a later date if we had known it wasn't going to go as soon as we thought. Does it help avoid those type of scenarios?
Exactly. Because I think that's the thing in the very early interviews with chiefs of staff. That's what we heard over and over again. It was like, I think I have tabs on everything. And yet there's always a surprise where suddenly I'm firefighting. And if I would have only known 2 weeks earlier, we could have like completely mitigated that delay. So one of our early customers, for them, this is very notorious in product releases, even though they have like a huge ops team, like not just like the chief of staff, but they have technical program managers, they have product ops, they have project managers. They have a huge function, and really it's just there to make sure we know what's going on in R&D. And he was like, we're literally minimum 6 weeks late with every deadline we have in product. Every time. That's millions of revenue for us. And like, no matter how big the ops team is, there's still always context we're missing because, people always kind of want to like look good. So that's again goes back to the like, everyone says things are on track, they're on track, they're on track. They're operating in these systems that are very hard to interpret. Like Jira is very hard to interpret. GitHub is hard to interpret unless you sit in those functions. And it's missing so much context because like, you look at Jira and it's like, we had this Jira ticket for like 2 months. Like, why is it not moving? Yeah. But the context is happening in Slack where maybe engineering deprioritized it, or again, it was a bug that hit. But it's really hard to keep track. Like when we're looking at one of our customers, they have 300 employees as tech company, and they have 3,000 events in Linear every week, which is their R&D management tool. So those are ticket comments, ticket changes. It's just not humanly possible to actually have tabs on everything. And that's where you get the surprises and then you're firefighting. But either way, it's probably too late. So boom, like you have the repercussions on the business, right? Whatever it is, depending on what's delayed or what's blocked, etc. And I think the biggest thing is also that it hurts trust, right? And I think that's where then the ops people have to come in, and they're like the buffer between sales being pissed off that the product's late again, or they're surprised by this bug. And it's like, why is this down? Like the ops person's like, okay, we got this under control and like keep everyone in the loop, make sure product's moving. So it turns into this whole like spiral. And we're like, how can we like stop that spiral from happening and help people to be more informed to, take action much earlier with a more informed way based on like context and things that are happening at the org. And trending topics was one of the biggest things that came from customer feedback. This wasn't even something that we came up with. It was really just things people said. I was like, I just wish I would actually know what conversations are happening, what people care about, how things are shifting week over week. Cause like it's really hard to keep tabs on this in real time.
How would you suggest positioning this if you're a chief of staff? So if you're talking to a chief of staff, they're like, yes, 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 I need this. This sounds great, but I have to pitch it and sell it to my company. One counter argument I can think of is, well, whoa, 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 you're going to like be reading all of my emails and all of my Slacks. Like, what if I like am talking about an HR matter or whatnot? So how do you protect against privacy concerns?
Yeah. And like companies are still in full control to like put restrictions in place in terms of what we're looking for. We have like sensitive category filtering. We're not meddling with HR at all right now or legal. We primarily look at product engineering, customer success, sales, marketing, because that's where we saw chiefs of staff have the biggest friction today to really bridge those teams. And like that's where there's the most distrust, the most tension, but also the biggest business impact in terms of revenue and retention. So we're very focused on looking into like Jira, GitHub, Slack, make sense of this and then package it for sales, marketing, etc. So they're actually very informed. And with that, again, take that burden off of the chief of staff to kind of be the one creating peace between those functions by gathering the context and relaying it to those teams. So the people have like full control of what's visible to whom. We're not storing any data. We're only a processor. So your data stays in Slack where it's already happening. We're not in DMs. We're only in public channels. You have to actually add us to these channels. So you still have control on what we're actually looking at. With email specifically right now, you actually tell us what email to map. And it's easy as a Chrome extension. You just like map this and it happens. We're still looking into whether we can do that in a more automated way without overstepping. So that's still something we're figuring out. And then chiefs of staff always have the option to like modify. They can just restrict their work stream just to themselves, no one else, and still like kind of tailor the narrative. So we've actually not come across this being a concern yet, but we also always send a security overview where everything is like outlined on how it works, which I think helps us get ahead of it. Um, so that hasn't really been a concern. I think for us, it's been more that empowering the chief of staff to get other teams on board, right? Get the technical team on board, get CS on board, and really helping them tell the story to those stakeholders, which are very important parts of that journey, right? So that's been more so our focus on like, how can we help them tell the story to those teams? And it's been obviously close collaborators with us too, giving us like insights into what they've seen work or not.
Sure. And then for those other teams, they don't have to do anything, right? So it's just, hey, it's an inform, like it's certainly inform. We're using this new system called Joyn. It does this, this, and this. This is what it'll be doing in the background, but you don't have to change anything in your workflow or migrate data over in your department.
Yes, exactly. It was like more the, oh, they want to have access to all of our Jira tickets. Like, what do we get out of this? Right. So for technical teams, the biggest thing was they hate reporting out. Like they literally hate writing like weekly updates or being in these like status meetings. Like that's not stuff that they want to do, but they have to because it's the only way right now they can keep people informed. It's also, we always ask people in close, what's your most dreaded Slack ping? And for product, it's always like what sales ask me when something gets released. Because I literally communicate this all the time. And still, I keep getting the same question. When I ask sales or CS, it's like that something in product will be delayed. So, there is just this like very clear friction on like between those teams. So for engineering, the big benefit is like in product, you're not reporting out anymore. Like we were talking to a PM at GitHub and it was asking her, so how much time do you spend in syncs and subsyncs every week? She's 80% of my time. GitHub is important because GitHub has internal tooling that they build out to mitigate this. They have TPMs, they have chiefs of staff. They, again, have all these things. And yet she spends 80% of her time just in syncs and subsyncs. She's like, that does not include one-on-ones. If I'm fully honest with you, I only do my strategic work after work. And 80% has been the magic number. Talking to PMM, talking to PMs, like for them, the overhead is so significant. And I don't think people really grasp that. And that's been really eye-opening to us too. When the higher up I move talking to leadership, the less they know what their teams are actually doing.
Yeah.
I was asking like director of engineering at Pinterest. I was like, how much time do the engineers spend in syncs and keeping people? And he's like, maybe 4 hours a week. Which I was like, I think that's like an underestimation. But even if you think about it, Pinterest has 1,400 engineers. Like still, even if it's just 4 hours every week, which seems little, if you scale it to 1,400 people, that's insane losses every year that shouldn't happen, right? But then when I talked to an engineering manager at Pinterest, that number at least triples. It's this disconnect, right, between how teams are actually like spending their time. But yes, anyway, so for engineering, it's just like no longer reporting out, save for product. You get time back to a customer code, whatever. For CS and marketing, it's more around wanting to be informed. I don't want to be in the dark. Anything that happens in product engineering impacts my timelines. And for sales, there, especially in SaaS business, the revenue number is very waterfall. So there's a very agile way of working that engineering doesn't really work with the waterfall way of forecasting, right? Your revenue and like your commission and all of these things. So being in the dark is very frustrating because it impacts how you pitch, what you can pitch, etc. So that's kind of been the value props for those sides. So for engineering, you literally don't have to do anything. They'll just get time back for free. Customer success sales will just get insights that are personalized to them to be really informed so they can do their job. And the chief of staff is getting time back to not be the coordinator and one-on-ones with 1,000 people or being in like 100 Slack channels to know what's going on. So everyone wins. It's just we have to help them like tell that story to kind of like make that like clear upfront and get the buy-in, I guess, from those other teams, even though they don't have to really do anything. They're still part of it, of course.
Beautiful. And just if people are listening and want to know more, where can they go to find out more about Joyn or connect with you and ask questions? What's the best resource to do that?
So our website is joyn.one, which is the JOYN.1. And like you can request a demo on the site if you want to like do a demo. And you can always reach out to me, which is just Larissa at joyn.one. Because we're still hoping to like talk to a bunch of people, get their insights. We're still early, right? We launched the first version of the product in the fall last year. So we're still like in the stage of just like learning. So the more people we can talk about kind of their experiences, the better. So doors always open to just hear people out too. I love a good rant session with chiefs of staff. It's always great just to like, chat about all the things we're dealing with, which is a lot. So yeah.
Well, Larissa, thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights on Chief of Staff and also trying to make Chiefs of Staff life easier with this new tool. So appreciate all of that. And best of luck with Joyn. And hopefully, if you're listening and you want to connect with Larissa, we'll have the links in the show notes. But hopefully that's just good food for thought on some different tools you can use or different places where you might be losing time today where you need to solve for that. So Larissa, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. This was exciting.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.